So it's your morning commute, you're in your car. How are you supposed to practice music if you don't actually have your musical instrument on you and you're supposed to be focused on the road? Well, it's actually quite easy. Simply take your right hand, place it on the steering wheel, and then take your left hand and place it on your right forearm. Your right forearm is a great stand-in for the fingerboard of a bass guitar or a regular guitar or any kind of stringed instrument like a violin or a viola. The tactile feedback of fingers on flesh can help you practice songs, practice scales, and practice arpeggios without actually having an instrument on you. I got this tip from my first upright bass teacher. The story that he told was that he was waiting for the doctor in the doctor's office, and he happened to have the sheet music to the Bach cello suites. He used the time to work out the fingering for the first 8 measures or so of the second cello suite, the one in D minor. And when he went home, he found, having never played the cello suite before in his life, he was able to play fairly convincingly those first 8 measures. When he was doing this, he was engaged in a form of what's called mental practice. And there's actually a fair number of scientific studies that suggest that mental practice is almost as good as actual practice when it comes to musical instruments. There was a study out of Harvard conducted on 3 sets of pianists. The first set of pianists were told not to practice for a week. The second set were told to practice a series of exercises daily for a week. And the third set were told to practice those same exercises daily for a week, but only thinking about those exercises, not actually playing them on the piano. The study found that the control group, the group that didn't practice, didn't get any better. Duh. But interestingly, it found very little difference in performing ability between the group that actually practiced and the group that simply mentally practiced. fMRI studies on musicians later found that most of the same areas of the motor cortex are engaged through mental practice as they are through actual practice. But interestingly, it's only most of the same areas of the motor cortex. What this means is that in order to engage the entire motor cortex, you need to actually move your fingers to make the same connections that you would make through actual daily practice of your instrument, which makes this forearm trick so useful. So what are you supposed to actually practice? Well, my favorite thing to do is to actually just play along with songs in the car that you know. That way your fingers are engaged in the same way that your fingers would be engaged in actually playing the song, while you're able to get at least a little bit of auditory feedback through the song that you're listening to. This idea of auditory feedback, the idea that you might get a reward for the finger movements that your hand makes as it's going across the fingerboard, or in this case, the forearm board, well, that idea seems like it's important, right? Equally important to that, though, is the ability to audiate, the ability to visualize, quote unquote, sound in your mind's ear, the same way that you might visualize a physical space in your mind's eye. Chances are you'll probably be able to do this anyway. Just try practicing a song that you know really well on your forearm and try imagining what that sounds like as you're playing it on your forearm. If you play that song a bunch of times before, you'll be able to audiate that sound simply by moving your fingers. There's a relationship of that physical movement to the memory of the sound in your mind's ear. It's through this memory of pitch that you're able to practice without your instrument. Audiation is very much based on memory. Your ability to remember what a major scale sounds like as you're fingering a major scale up and down across one octave is based upon how many times you've played that major scale. So what that means is that familiarity of your instrument directly impacts the efficacy of mental practice. Studies have found that professionals are way better at mental practice than amateurs and will get more out of mental practice because they know what certain hand movements will sound like. What's more is that mental practice can be incredibly taxing. It can be incredibly exhausting to try and remember what things sound like and stay focused without that constant auditory feedback that your instrument will give you. But there are other kinds of feedback that you can use if you're in a car and you don't have an instrument and you want to be able to practice your musicianship. One of the big reasons why we like listening to loud music is because it gives us the ability to feel music in our bodies in a way that the basilar membrane in the inner ear just can't quite replicate. That's normally how we experience music, is fluid in our inner ear vibrating at certain frequencies and then being turned into electrical impulses that our brain then interprets. For us, we like having a more physical sensation in our chest. Now, unfortunately, the volume necessary to give us that sort of feeling in our chest is going to eventually damage our inner ear. So we're going to have to try and figure out another way of getting that feeling in our bodies. So how do you think we're going to do that? Well, have you ever wondered why Tibetan monks Om as a mantra, it produces a buzzing sound in the lips when you go Let's try this while we're stopped. I'm going to bring up a Tempura app. Tempura is basically a drone. What we're going to do is we're going to sing and then close our lips and focus the feeling of the sound in our lips. We're not really trying to achieve spiritual enlightenment with this. We're just trying to feel music in our bodies the same way that we feel music in our bodies when we listen to loud music. It also gives us the added benefit of not only auditory feedback, but physical feedback for our efforts. And what we can do is combine this method with our forearm finger practice method to get the best of both worlds. Let's practice a major scale, really focusing in on the feeling of the buzzing of the lips, and play all the notes of the major scale on our forearm while listening to this drone. I think that ambulance that just went by was an F sharp. Let's do it again in Ionian. One of the things that I love about practicing in the car is it's kind of like a cocoon separated from the rest of humanity. There's this thing that psychologists call evaluation apprehension, which is the anxiety that comes from being watched by other people. That comes about for me personally whenever I'm trying to sing. I don't have the greatest singing voice, and I don't pretend to, but whenever I'm in the car, I have the opportunity to practice away from that anxiety. So you ever wonder why, if you play the guitar, you can pick up any guitar, no matter whether or not you've played that particular instrument or not, and make music with it? It might seem like an obvious thing, but think about it. You're not actually playing one instrument, you're playing the idea of an instrument. When you practice, what you're doing is you're mapping the meaning of the idea of the guitar to specific finger movements and specific sounds. This is why mental practice is so effective, and why my bass teacher could play that Bach prelude without ever having actually practiced it in the flesh before. Basically, what I'm trying to say is that all music practice takes place in your head, whether or not you're in the doctor's office or in a car or actually with an instrument. And the more comfortable you are staying there and staying focused in that realm, the more effective your practice will be. But practice, especially practice where you're just thinking about practicing, can be fairly mentally exhausting, the same way that it's exhausting to practice a sport for hours on end. Whether or not you actually have the instrument in your hand kind of doesn't matter. It's an athletic event regardless of how you do it. A lot of what we've been talking about so far has been about approximating the feeling of an instrument while you're in the car, but you don't actually have to do that to improve your musicianship while you're on your commute or a long journey like I am right now. Instead, what you can do is sit back and listen to music, but maybe listen to music in a different way than you might normally listen to music on car rides. You see, most people put on music in the background as kind of like this wallpaper to their car trip. It's meant to induce a feeling, but you're not really engaged with the music the same way that you might be engaged with the music when you're trying to play it on your forearm. So here's a challenge. Listen to the same piece of music 10 times in a row. Try and memorize as much as you can from that piece of music, whether it's the lyrics or the drum groove or the bass line. Try and memorize salient aspects of that piece of music. Think about how actors have to repeat the same lines over and over and over again in the process of memorizing them. If they just had a tape of the lines playing on in the background, like you might with music playing on in the background, it will just become noise to them and might eventually become annoying to them if they keep hearing the same lines over and over again. But by actively engaging with the lines, they're able to memorize the lines by repeating them over and over again and really get deeper into what the lines actually mean. This is why I'm suggesting that you listen to the same song 10 times in a row. By the 10th time, if you've been practicing deep listening and paying close attention to what every instrument is doing, you will have a much deeper appreciation for what the music actually is. So there's a lot you can do if you're in your car and you want to make the best use of your time and you want to practice music. What it comes down to really is just a mindfulness of what music practice means. It also comes down to a mindfulness of keeping your eyes on the road because safety first, everybody. Don't get too lost in your musical thoughts. Otherwise, there might be a musical crash and your horizon. Musical crash? That I'm not going to end the video like that. Okay, cut.